Well, I think, first of all, I think Spyro and Crash Bandicoot were more impressive remakes, actually, than I thought they were going to be. They are beat for beat, but they're really well done. And
Yeah.
like Blue Point level remake, in my opinion, just different kinds of games. But nonetheless, I'll grant you that and say that Dead Space and Resident Evil 4 are obviously going to be, well, one is and one will be a little bit different. We don't know to what extent Resident Evil 4 will be different. I don't want to know either. We'll find out. But we actually discussed on the spoiler cast, and we were all on this for Dead Space, and you guys can check that out on Patreon, that we quite enjoyed the different turns that the game took, including the inclusion of things like side quests and kind of loadless areas and not sealing things off by chapter, and the minor differences that they made. And so it's funny, Chris, because you and I think, agreed, and I think you might have agreed too, Dustin, that Dead Space Remake is an absolute player in Game of the Year for me right now. It's, I would assume, the game to beat. I expect that it will be beaten. I hope that it will be beaten, but it was awesome. And so I think it should be considered for Game of the Year 100%. And it's not because they changed it up. It's not Final Fantasy VII Remake by any stretch of the imagination, which is really just a whole new game. But it's different enough and yet true enough that I think it is its own project and deserves that level of recognition, especially because it's been so long. What do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because I was looking at movies, and I think there's many examples of remakes that got Oscar nominations. Like, that's totally normal that if you remake a movie that it's not like it's ineligible. And so
Stars Born is one of them.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. True Grit was one of them as well. There's a long list of movies that are remakes that were eligible for Game of the Year. And that's one of the things too, is that, I mean, for us, our Game of the Year is just kind of like our whatever. We just do it just for fun. But I think that with anything, whether it's movies or TV or music, is that we got it. I understand it's fun, this idea of like, oh, what's going to win? But we can't give it too much credence because it really is dumb. And a lot of the ways these things are selected is also dumb. So your personal Game of the Year can be whatever you want, or your favorite creators, their Game of the Year can be whatever they want it to be. And I think that has way more value than some list of critics that are of, different levels of credibility, we'll say, when it comes to selecting what the game is. So yeah, and I think there is something to be said too about, we've had this conversation many times about the difference like between remaster and remake, and I think that there is some variability on like, well, should a remaster be your Game of the Year? In fact, I think it was a few years ago that I wanted to say my Game of the Year was that Nier Replicant remaster / remake, and I felt hesitant at the time. But looking at it now, it's like, who cares? It was released, and I played it that year. And so, yeah, that was my Game of the Year that year.
Yeah.
So
I do think that there is a differentiation between those, though. Like, I look at Shadow of the Colossus or Demon Souls as like straight up remakes that are not classified as new games, in my opinion. Like, or it would be weird to classify those games. While I look at something like Resident Evil 2 would be a good example with with some of the changes there. Certainly Resident Evil 3 and Dead Space, where they're a little different. And like Dead Space even has New Game Plus, so like a whole new ending and all these different things. So it is actually a potentially different product. And so I just think that we kind of inherently, or maybe we don't, and that will continue to be the argument, but I feel like we inherently know what the difference between those games are. Like, we understand that there's a difference. And when you see something like Mega Man Battle Network Collection come out, that's its own thing. And when you see Shadow of the Colossus come out, that's its own thing. And when you see Demon Souls come out, it's its own thing, and so on and so forth. So I think it's kind of intuitive.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add, Chris?
Well, no, I would say, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter what you choose as Game of the Year, but I do think, I don't know, I guess it's more of like a question of the year, you know what I mean? Because like in 2013, or 2012, I played Shadow of the Colossus for the first time. That was the first time I played it, and I was blown away by it by then, which was like many, many, many years later.
And did you play the PS3 version?
I played the PS3 version, okay. the one in the ICO
collection
bundle.
Yeah.
And that was like slightly up-resed or whatever, but I remember being blown away by it, even though it was a PS2 up-res of a game. And like, you know, I could have said theoretically that was my Game of the Year that year, because not really much else captivated me in the same way. But, you know, yeah, it's there's a weird line there because I do feel like Resident Evil 2 and Dead Space and no doubt Resident Evil 4 and some of these other ones are so transformative. I think it's a matter of being transformative while remaining as true to the source material as possible. And it's I think what qualifies movie remakes as well. Like you wouldn't necessarily put like a, this movie's now available in 4K as like a new movie. You know what I mean? Even though it is like technically a better watching experience and it is new things, maybe it's got some bonus features, like maybe it's got like, outtakes or commentary or whatever, but that's still ultimately like the same movie as opposed to like something like, I don't know, the Thing from the 1970s, which is like a remake of like a really, really old movie. And it's still generally the same plot, but just the sheer uptick in technology and the difference in execution transform. Like most people don't even remember that original, the Thing remake from the 70s. Most people remember that as being the original. It's not. It's a remake of like a really, really old movie. But most people consider that the original because it's such an iconic piece of cinema. And there's no argument to be made that it's not, like, it's clearly superior to the original, like in every way, and it's transformative in every way. I think that's what Resident Evil 2 does. And I think that's what Dead Space does. And I think that's what Final Fantasy VII does. Not necessarily in, acclaim. It's not necessarily, these games aren't necessarily way, way, way better, but like they're definitely way, way, way different experiences. And I think that's ultimately that's my personal line for qualification is like, how transformative is this to the experience? Does it enhance it? And is it different in a meaningful way? And I would say that, Blue Point Shadow of the Colossus remake is fantastic, but it's not what RE2 is to its original,
Yeah,
but I think Dustin's also right in the sense that like none of this matters.
Well, totally. It's just
it's fun to talk about.
Yeah,
though.
it's interesting fodder, and yeah, again, I think it's that intuition, and we're going to need to know as more and more games are remade. Like BioShock will inevitably get a remake, and games like that. And I guess we'll see what they choose to do with them. My hope is that two things. One is that they keep the originals intact and available to people, and the second thing is that they just don't reinvent the wheel if they don't have to. When you look at a game, where I look at a game like Symphony of the Night, for instance, there is no remaking Symphony of the Night. There's nothing you could do to that game to make it better. It's perfect. And there are a lot of games like that. I think about that. I think that with all the 2D Mario games, even Super Mario All-Stars was superfluous. What we liked about it was that it was different and unique for a time when we didn't get re-releases. So I don't know. We'll see how it all shakes out. But right now, Dead Space Remake certainly is my game of the year. But it is very early. But it is awesome. If you have not played it, you definitely should. And Resident Evil 4, I'm going to be inside of you soon enough.